Okay, Judges chapter 6, verse 1.
Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of the Midians 7 years.
Okay, according to Garstein, who's kind of been our, usher in regards to chronology, the oppression of the Midianites, according to him, that we read about in this verse, occurred during the reigns of Ramses IV, that's him, and Ramses V, about 1161 to 1154. That's when he dates these events, 1161 to 1154. Now, Ramses IV and Ramses V were weaker leaders, and they lost control of monitoring the sacred bridge, Highway 80, the land bridge, Canaan. And at home in Egypt, they were in tremendous religious and political and economic chaos. They've got enough problems at home that they're not going to try and expand into a different region. So those are approximate dates then for this passage. Once again, the geopolitical climate was ripe for outsiders on the fringes of Israel because the cat's away, he's at home in Egypt. The geopolitical climate was ripe for outsiders on the fringes of Israel to raid and to pillage the land of milk and honey. This verse marks the first S in the cycle, which of course is sin. Chapter 6, verse 2, Lane.
Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds.
Okay. Because the main routes and the inlands of Israel were not able to be manned by the strong Egyptian presence, the Israelites now have become weak once again after Deborah. They've apparently lost control of the pivotal valley of Jezreel once again, and they've retreated up to their mouse holes in the high hill country up in Shingletown and Manton. Okay, that's where we're at. The bulk of the account seems to center on the territory within Canaan, within Israel, of eastern Manasseh, which is right in here, and the Jordan Valley, which is right in here. The bulk of the Gideon account focuses on this region of Israel, eastern Manasseh and the Jordan Valley. Okay? Verse number 3. Bob.
So it was, whenever Israel had sown, Midianites would come up also Amalekites, and the people of the east would come up against them.
Okay. The semi-nomadic clans, the Midianites, were obviously in search of grazing for the flocks, and they were in search of foodstuffs. And so they decided to attack Israel when, it's not mentioned here, but in other words, it's the times when kings go out to battle. This is likely springtime. This is when you would attack. You would attack when the roads were dry, when there's good visibility, and most importantly, when the crops, the wheat and the barley, were edible, because army marches on its stomach, and so this would be the perfect time to invade. Okay. It was likely the spring or very, very early in the summer season. Verse number 4. Ron?
And they encamped against them and destroyed the increase of the earth till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass.
Okay, so the Midianites and the Amalekites, these invading armies are being compared to the unstoppable swarm of locusts, devouring the earth. And in the ancient Near East, the locusts are considered to be the army of the Lord. the destruction in this verse that these people groups are havocing on Israel is comparable to the 8th plague of Egypt. I will, in Exodus 10, 4 and 5, if you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your field. And so, in my language, right, they destroyed the increase of the earth. They left nothing behind. No, not only all the wheat and all the barley and all the foodstuffs, but they took all of the sheep and all the donkeys, right, everything. Now, it is possible if some of their hordes, the Midianites and the Amalekites, it is possible if some of their hordes were coming from the east because there was no longer an Egyptian presence at Bet-Shan. Because Bet-Shan was the doorman, the Egyptian doorman of anyone coming from the east. But since Egyptian power has waned under the reign of Ramses IV and V, they cannot pump in the proper military and economic resources to sustain the Egyptian stronghold. That doorman is now gone. No military barrier, therefore, to prevent them from entering. Where do they enter? The breadbasket of the north, the valley of Jezreel. And this region in red right here is an approximate location of the home of the Midianites. Verse 5, Mark.
For they would come up with their livestock in their tents. They would come in like locusts for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it.
Okay, thank you. The raids were not only possible because of the dysfunctional Egyptian government under Ramses IV and Ramses V, but possibly also because of the weakening of the Canaanite forces in the region due to the death of Sisera and the overthrown hub city of Hatzor. Kind of like a sort of modern day parallel is when Mubarak was king of Egypt, or president of Egypt, for like 30-something years. And during that period of his reign, sure, he really ruled with a rod of iron, and many people considered him to be oppressive. But you know what? He kept peace. He kept order. And he was an American ally. But what happens as soon as you take Mubarak out? The Arab Spring, chaos, disorder, the Islamic Brotherhood. Another example would be Saddam Hussein. Yeah, Saddam Hussein, to many people, right, was a tyrant, an evil person, and I'm sure he is or was. But he held order, he held peace together, generally speaking. What happens when you take Saddam Hussein out? Now Iran moves in. Now ISIS moves in. Now it's a disaster. And it could have been the same thing with Jabin and the Canaanites. Yeah, we don't want them here, but at least they're holding order. They're holding order together. Now, as soon as Jabin goes and the Canaanites go, then the floodgates open. And the equivalent of, right, those people groups, right, they start to enter into the land and wreak havoc. Verse number 6. Blaine.
Midian was so impoverished, the Israelites, that they cried out to the Lord for help.
Okay, the Midianites. Midianite comes from a word which probably means strife. Strife or conflict, something like that, okay? The Midianites, who are these guys? Well, here's another possible allotment instead of here, is here. They're definitely a Northern Arabian and a Transjordanian Semitic people group who are associated with the clans of the Ishmaelites. We see this from Genesis 37:25. As they sit down to eat their food, that would be the brothers of Joseph, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, myrrh. They were on their way to take them down to Egypt. They were apparently the Midianites, because they're called Midianites later in the Genesis 37 account. They're apparently some kind of sheep, goat, semi-nomadic people who were in the business of importing and exporting and trading commodities, and this is their first mention here in the scriptures, and that is of bringing top shelf luxury items from Transjordan through Canaan down to Egypt. Okay, we don't know a lot about them, but that's just a real thumbnail sketch. Now, 2/3 of the time when the Midianites are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, it's in the book of Judges. This verse marks the second S in the cycle, which is servitude. Servitude. Verse number 7, Bob.
And it came to pass, when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because of the Midianites.
Okay, that's a really weird chapter or verse break there, but okay. I don't know why Robertus Stephanus in 1551 put a verse break there, but he did. So we're stuck with that. We're stuck with it. The children of Israel were desperately in need of an that's the point. They're desperately in need of an organized military leader. There's no Joshua, there's no Deborah, there's no Ehud, there's nobody. This verse marks the third S in the cycle. Supplication. Supplication. Verse number 8. Brown.
That the Lord sent a prophet unto the children of Israel, and said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you forth out of the house of bondage.
Okay. The unnamed prophet recounts the defining moment in the history of the Israelites. Okay? Which took place probably, if Garstein's chronology is correct, like 300 years earlier. Like longer than George Washington from us. Okay? A long time ago, if you take an early date of the Exodus in Garstein's chronology. And he's building a theological explanation to these people why they are being oppressed. You're 300 plus years removed from the giving of the Torah. You're as far away in your thought and practice to true Yahwistic worship. You're probably not even keeping Sabbath. You're not keeping the law of Moses. You're not keeping the feasts. You're just so far-fetched from the will of the Word of God. And so the prophet, I should say, is trying to build a theological example to these people why this is the case. Verse number 9. Verse 9.
And I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you, and gave you their land.
Okay, so the prophet continues to recall all the signs and the wonders which the hand of God orchestrated to deliver his people out of bondage, because these people seem to be totally ignorant of this truth. And also how the Lord fought for Israel during the invasion under Joshua, and how they settled in the land of Canaan. You're interested in what you want to be interested in. You're not interested in what you don't want to be interested in. And over time, it just kind of got lost in translation. The people are just clueless as to the historicity, the accounts, the narrative of the salvation of their people out of Egypt and how they ended up in this land, even though it was 10 generations ago. Okay. Verse number 10.
And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live, but you have not obeyed me.
My teacher, Anson Rainey, by the way, if you ever want to buy the Magna Carta of geography books, it's a $100 book or so, but it's worth every cent. It's called The Sacred Bridge. The Sacred Bridge. There's an amended version, which is good, but if you can get the I think it's the first edition one, the big one, Right, that's a wonderful book to have in your library. Full of wonderful maps, beautiful historicity of not only the Israelites, but Assyriology, just a bunch of good stuff. So that guy, Rainey, suggests that the term Amorites be translated as Westerners. As Westerners. Therefore, this expression, Amorites, it would be an umbrella term. It would represent all of the ethnic, cultural, and linguistic people groups who resided in Canaan upon the Israelite invasion. So it's an umbrella term. Once again, we observe the cause and effect ideology represented in the world of the Bible. Verse number 11, Lane.
The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites.
Okay, so an official representative of Yahweh is dwelling or is remaining under an oak. The scene opens in a town called Ophrah, and it probably means something like fawn, a fawn. And it was probably, we're not exactly sure, it was probably located in the center or the eastern hills of Ephraim. And some suggest it's in the vicinity, somewhere around Shechem, which would be right about where the pointer is there. Nevertheless, Joash, the name means given by the Lord. Given by the Lord. That's, of course, Gideon's given name is Joash. He is identified with a clan, which we would expect. And that clan is of the Abi-Erizet, which is a division, a branch under the umbrella of the tribe of Manasseh. The barley harvest normally precedes the wheat harvest in Israel by a couple weeks. And for whatever it's worth, recently there was a wheat harvest in Hebron at the first week of June. So that means we could probably date the events to this chapter sometime in April or May. Okay. Verse 12, Bob.
And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor."
Okay, the angel, who it seems for some time was sitting under the oak tree, eventually came to Gideon, who apparently took zero interest in him. And Gideon's probably likely pondering the dire straits that the nation's in. Is this the same angel who appeared to Moses, who appeared to the mother of Samson, who appeared to Joseph, who appeared to Zacharias? I don't know. Nevertheless, the mighty man of valor. The only other persons in the scriptures with that title are Jephthah, which we'll see later in the book of Judges, Jeroboam, the king, Naaman, the Syrian, 2 Kings 5, Zadok, the priest in 1 Chronicles 12, and Eliada, one of David's mighty men in 2 Chronicles 17. Those are the only other people in the scriptures given that wonderful handle of a mighty man of valor. Okay? Verse 13, Ron.
And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all these miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? And now the Lord hath forsaken us, and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites.
Okay, the complaint of Gideon seems to reflect the scarcity of miracles in the world of the Bible. That seems to be the reflection of his complaint, the scarcity of miracles. If we, just for the heck of it, kind of put miracles on a chart in the scriptures, after the eruption of miracles before and after the Exodus, there are 0, and I want to be careful how I use the word miracle, but there are 0 recorded signs and wonders, miracles. 0. By a person. After the Exodus and the wanderings until Elijah and Elisha. 700 years. 0 miracles. And I want to be careful how I use that word, right? The sun stood still, sure, in one state, right? God brought rain on Sisera. That's a miracle. You know what I mean? But there aren't anything until Elijah and Elisha. And then there's an outburst, right? Raising from the dead. The cruse of oil shall not fail, neither shall the barrel of meal waste until the Lord sends rain upon the earth with the widow at Zarephath. Real miracles. But David, 0 miracles. Solomon, 0 miracles. Nothing. Hezekiah, he experienced, right, the sun standing still, but he didn't do the miracle, And then if you continue your chart, 0 miracles for another 700 years. From Elijah and Elisha until the ministry of Jesus and the disciples. Daniel, sure, he experienced a miracle in the sense of the revelation of eschatological end time events, but he didn't, Isaiah didn't do any miracles, None of them did. Isaiah, Jeremiah, nothing. Ezekiel, no. Daniel, no. And there's nothing until Jesus and the disciples. And there's another outburst, right? And so Gideon's main complaint here is that there's been a scarcity of miracles in the world of the Bible. In other words, where's God? Right? Because Jews seek sign. Jews are all about signs, whereas the Greeks are more all about wisdom. Exactly. Okay. Verse 14.
The Lord looked at him and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?
Saving Israel from the hand of the Midianites not only entailed restoring the nation religiously, economically, and politically, but would also mean that he had to reestablish the territorial rights of the respective tribes in Israel and Transjordan. Verse 15, Lane.
But Lord, Gideon asked, How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family.
Like Moses, Exodus 3:11. Like Isaiah, Isaiah 6:5. Like Jeremiah 1:6. Like them, he refuses his original calling from God. Isaiah does it, Jeremiah does it, and Moses does it, and here Gideon does it. They refuse it, their original calling from God. Now, like David the king, Gideon comes from, the word is dal for poor. My family is poor. The word is dal, and it means low, or it can mean thin. Okay? So Gideon comes from a low or a thin family, and is the youngest son, like David. But nevertheless, right, he's chosen of God, right? The foolish things to confound the wise. Verse 16. Bob.
And the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man.
The Lord only speaks these words of comfort to men of God in times of great crisis. That is to say, surely I will be with you. Okay? Very rarely does God speak these words to someone. The first time he does that in the text to anyone is Isaac. And it's during a time of famine. I will be with you. Then he does it to Jacob, when Jacob returns to the promised land. After he left the house of Laban. Next, to Moses, I will be with you. Right at the burning bush account. When Joshua was just about to invade Canaan. Joshua chapter 1, right? I will be with you. When Jeroboam became the king of Israel, in 1 Kings 11:38 he says it, and of course, similarly to the disciples as they began the Great Commission, right at the end of Matthew chapter 28. I will be with you, very rarely. Those are the other examples. The defeat of the Midianites is so certain that it is comparable to Gideon fighting and defeating just one man. Okay. Verse 17.
He said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, then show me the sign that thou talkest with me.
Doubting that the people of Israel will believe him, or hearken unto his voice, like Moses, right? Primarily, probably because of his social standing, because he comes from a lower, thin family, and who knows how old he is, but he's the youngest son. And because of the silence of miracles for hundreds of years, probably, he asked God for a sign. Not only to comfort his own doubts, which you can relate to, but to prove to the people that God has indeed appeared after a very, very long period of silence. Verse 18, Mark.
Please do not depart from here until I come back to you, and bring out my offering and lay it before you. And he said, I will remain until you return.
So, he's being not ignorant. He's being not forgetful to entertain a stranger. He maybe senses, maybe not, senses the messenger's uniqueness, kind of like Abraham did in Genesis chapter 18. He prepares a meal on the messenger's behalf before the messenger departs. That's good ancient Near Eastern hospitality. Okay? That's all. Verse 19, Lane.
Gideon went in, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah, a flour, he made bread without yeast, putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot. He brought them out and offered them to him under the oak.
Well, like Abraham, in the same Genesis 18 account, Gideon shows absolutely positively no expense in this meal. By slaughtering and preparing a fatted calf, remember in the sheep-goat world, you're cashing in your part of your bank account for this kind of thing. He does it for the honored guest. The hastiness of the preparation of the meal, like in Genesis 19, is shown in that the bread was unleavened. Now, someone has computed that an ephah of flour would be enough to feed 50 men for one day. An ephah. So the abundance of bread, the abundance of meat, a whole calf or a whole goat and all this bread and all the goodies that come along with it, right? They're obviously signifying the honor that's being shown to this guest by the house of Gideon. Verse 20, Bob.
The angel of God said to him, Take the meat and the unleavened bread, and lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth. And he did so.
So after taking tremendous energy and effort to prepare the meal, the angel unexpectedly does not sit down to eat, but begins to answer the request of Gideon by showing him a sign to comfort his call, his divine call. Verse number 21, Ron.
Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand, and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat, the unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight.
The prepared meal now becomes a meal offering and a drink offering, or I should say probably a sin offering to Yahweh upon the unhewn rock, right? An unhewn rock. As the angel, by the way, I was reading an article today in the Bar magazine about the four-horned altar they found at Beersheba from the time of the united or the divided monarchy around after David. And not only was it hewn when it's supposed to be unhewn, but on the Israelite altar in the bottom right-hand corner, the stone had a snake engraved in it, which is, it's in situ, it's original. So it's kind of interesting. Why would you engrave a serpent into the altar of Yahweh at Beersheba?
That's interesting.
Something to think about. Anyways, so the meal becomes an offering to God. That's the point. And the angel extends the staff in his hand, which of course assisted in his disguise as a traveler. And he touched, not struck, the rock. The Gideon request to receive a sign to confirm his calling is now answered, and apparently the messenger now quickly departs. Verse 22, Mark.
When Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face.
Because the traveler vanished, apparently, and did not continue down the road on his journey, and touched the flesh and the cakes with the staff, not the rock, right? He touched, in verse 21, the flesh and the unleavened cakes. He didn't touch the staff to the rock. It was validating his heavenly calling as a messenger of God. And he probably then couldn't be accused of being a charlatan, because they would often have a flint attached to the bottom of the staff, which when struck upon the rock could have caused a flame. But he didn't touch the staff to the rock. He touched the staff to the food. The food, well, is an offering. Verse number 23. 23. Wayne?
But the Lord said to him, Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die.
Because the Lord told him all those things he was to accomplish, which he did, and received the meal offering and the burnt offering from his hand, it was a sign that the Lord was not pleased to kill him. The Lord then promises him his life will not be taken in the upcoming battles, of which he's obviously nervous about.
It's almost as though there's a confusion between the angel and the Lord. Sometimes it's almost says an angel of the Lord, and then as the Lord said to him.
Exactly.
So I wonder, like in Abraham's, there's three angels, but yet they're almost divine angels. You have this Trinity.
You do. Yeah.
And you're wondering whether Gideon is seeing Christ in the form of an angel.
Well, that would be the kind of overarching general, the status quo understanding by most people within our circles that this is an example of a pre-incarnate. The only member of the Godhead who has a body. That's how most people understand it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a good idea. Verse number 24. Bob.
So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, The Lord is Peace. To this day, it is still in Ophrah of the Abiezrites.
Okay. So because of the apostasy of Israel, right, and their regional and inter-regional conflicts and wars and rumors of war, we should not be surprised that this is the first time in the book that an altar appears. The rock upon which the offering was earlier received, sooner than later, became a regional place of worship in Ephraim, in the region of Ephraim. As the Lord promised Gideon peace, Gideon now honors that vow and dedicates the altar in the name of the God of Israel, or the God of, the word shalom means complete. When someone would say shalom, what they're probably really saying is, if they know what they're talking about, is how is your completeness? How is your completeness? So Gideon dedicates the altar in the name of the God of completeness, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. Verse number 25, Ron.
And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young boy, even the second boy of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by him.
Okay, using the strong bull to help pull down the altar of Baal, and cutting down the grove, or cutting down the Asherah associated with Baal worship, was an act, a total act of disloyalty to his father's house, a total act of disloyalty to the popular and the local deity, and it was a work punishable by death. The bull that was used to pull down, the image of the bull, was likely being fatted for a special sacrifice to Baal. Verse 26. Mark.
Would that be
Yes.
like the Apis bull, in a sense? He comments on 7 years old, so I think the Apis bull, the Egyptian Apis bull was, the number 7 was important. In
Good.
Egyptian.
Great. I, to be honest with you, overlooked that, but that's good. Why would the offering go out of his way to say it's 7
Yeah,
years old?
and he's totally bold in doing this. I mean, he's probably taking the prime bull, and so it seems like Gideon has gotten some courage between a couple days before, and now he's doing something pretty bold.
Yeah, good. Very good. Verse 26, Mike.
And build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take a second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of Asherah, which you shall cut down.
Okay. So, probably using the stones from the toppled altar of Baal in secondary usage to build an altar to Yahweh, and probably using the wood from the trees or the Asherah, the grove, which covered what happened, or which covered the habits of those who were worshiping Baal. Gideon's first order of business before setting out to war with the Midianites was declaring war on Baal, or a religious reformation in Israel before we go out to battle. Okay? Verse 27.
So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of the town, he did it at night rather than in the day.
So the mentioning of 10 men is significant. It's called the minyan in Hebrew, Jewish thought and practice. 10 is so important, guys. Any public Jewish prayer meeting, even to this very day, has to have 10 men in it to meet the required religious obligations. 10 men are needed as a witness to something, like in chapter 4, verse 2. Then Boaz went and took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here," and they sat down, and etc. Marriage services require the presence of 10 men. It is as if Gideon is establishing his early following. That's the point. he's choosing men who apparently have not bowed the knee to Baal. Certainly the altar of Baal was destroyed in the dark to avoid any impediment from the idol-worshiping community to his ordination of the altar of Yahweh. 28, verse 28.
And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built.
Okay, so early in the morning, we see here, they rose early in the morning. This was and is a common time of prayer and worship in the world of the Bible. Genesis 19:27, for example, Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord and he looked towards ... Joshua 6:12. It's just that's early in the morning, guys. Now, of course, this is true to this very day, as the Fajr, or the Muslim pre-dawn prayer, takes place about, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, right? In the morning twilight, early in the morning. Okay. Verse number 29, Ron.
And they said one to another, who hath done this thing? When they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing.
Incensed to discover as they awoke that their altar was destroyed, their grove was cut down, and the bull was already probably devoted to Baal. The carcass of the bull was probably still smoking on the altar to Yahweh, I would guess. The idolatrous Israelites investigate, locate the culprit as someone from the house of Joash, since the altar was located on his property. Verse 30, Mark.
Then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son, that he may die, for he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah which was beside it.
Possibly one of the servants of Joash saw Gideon and his men lurking in the shadows of the night, or even one of the 10 men confessed to this outrageous act. We really don't know. Nevertheless, the unruly Israelites in the city and the surrounding daughter villages demanded that Joash could have possibly been their sheik. Okay, Joash. They demanded that he turn over his son to a public execution for the destruction of public property, and they seem to have, there's no mention, and they don't have an interest in the fact that it's his private property, but it's probable they're also very upset that the bull was likely sacrificed as well. Verse 31, Lane.
But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar.
So fed up with the apostasy, fed up with the dismal state of the spiritual life of the people of Israel for hundreds and hundreds of years, Joash probably surprised his countrymen, and he surprises them with a challenge that if Baal is indeed a god, let him save himself, because he doesn't need you to save him if he's a god. Verse 32, Bob.
Therefore, on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar.
Okay, like many other people in the world of the Bible, the name of Gideon is changed to, quote unquote, let Baal contend. It's about something what it means, right? Let Baal contend. So his name is changed to remember an essential, pivotal moment in his life. Like Abram is changed to Abraham. Abraham means the father of many nations. And there's other examples too, isn't there? People who change their names. Saul to Paul, etc. All right, verse number 33. Ron.
And all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel.
Okay, the semi-nomadic, tent-dwelling Midianites, and either they're mercenaries, they're hired mercenaries, or other members of the clan of Ishmaelites that dwelt to the east and to the south, east of the Dead Sea. They now overtook the pivotal, as you can see on the screen, Valley of Jezreel. Because remember, Ramses the Fourth, Ramses the Fifth, Egypt is weak. Egypt doesn't have the time, the energy, and the effort to pour into maintaining the valley. And so they hop on the opportunity. Verse number 34. Mark.
So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and the Abzerites were called together to follow him.
Okay, the Spirit of the Lord. The book of Judges is the first book in the scriptures to record the Spirit of the Lord coming upon a person. Othniel is the first, which we saw a few sessions ago. Now, the Spirit, it says, came, or lavash, upon him. That literally means that the Spirit clothed him. It clothed him, or it covered him. And it covered him with zeal, it covered him with courage to undertake the task at hand. Okay? Now, blowing the shofar as a public call to arms, the clan of Abiezer, that is to say his own clan, prepared themselves for war. Verse 35. Lane.
He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also into Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so what they too went up to meet him.
Okay, so basically what this verse is saying, guys, is all the northern tribes came to Gideon's call. Though no mention is made of Issachar. And no mention is probably made of Issachar because Issachar is either just gone, or just not gone, but just they have no inheritance because the Midianites and the Amalekites have now invaded their territory, the Valley of Jezreel, and they're just scattered abroad. But all the northern tribes come to Gideon's call. The southern tribes we see here were likely, they didn't come, and the reason they didn't come is they were likely cornered in or painted into a corner and overburdened by the Amalekite forces and the Midianite forces on their borders. It was just kind of like in the previous account, how Dan couldn't come, how Asher couldn't come, and how Reuben couldn't come. Maybe something similar to that. Verse 36. Bob?
So Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said."
Okay. Gideon said unto God, or spoke unto God. The power of the spoken word, or in this case, a spoken vow, in the world of the Bible, was considered to be binding and authoritative. Spoken words in ancient Israel, also amongst the Egyptians, also amongst the Greeks, also amongst the Babylonians and the Assyrians, were considered to be objects of power, the spoken word. Words spoken by God, words spoken by prophets, poets, priests, etc., they were believed to possess divine power. Once uttered, such words would take on everlasting life, the power of the spoken word. And God said, "Let there be light." By the word of the Lord were the heavens made. In the beginning was the word. Faith comes by hearing, not reading, right? Hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Take the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Let the word of Christ dwell richly in you over and over. The Bible is originally originally meant more for the ears than the eyes. But it's just within the last, timetable of history, the last few hundred years, where it's switched. Where now it's more for the eyes than the ears. Okay? Alright, verse 37. Verse 37. Ron?
Behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then I shall know that thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said.
Gideon would have taken the fleece, which probably weighed anywhere from 3 to 30 pounds, anywhere in that frame, 3 to 30 pounds, and he would have set it on the floor of the threshing floor, something like you see there, and probably at the same place where he encountered the angel of the Lord. Now, if the threshing floor was dry and the fleece was wet, that was the sign that God would fight for Israel.
He was
Okay.
threshing in a wine press
Does yours say wine press?
in the first chapter where he meets him. He's threshing in a wine press.
Okay. I believe you, I just don't. There it is, right there. He was threshing, he threshed wheat by the wine press. So.
Okay, mine is in the wine press.
Okay. Yeah, it would make sense if it was by it, because, a wine press is for threshing.
Yeah, it's confusing to me.
Yeah, good
Okay.
point. Good, thank you for bringing it up. Verse 38. Mark.
And it was so, when he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he drained the dew from the fleece in a bowl full of water.
In the world of the Bible, friends, dew is and was used as a symbol of God's blessing. Proverbs 19:12. A king's rage is like the roar of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. Hosea 14:5. I will be to Israel. How are you going to be to Israel, God? Like a refreshing dew from heaven. Dew was essentially temperature control for the fields, for the crops, etc. Remember when it does not rain, May, June, July, August, September, October, what? You don't have necessarily your kind of artificial irrigation that we have today. How are things going to survive? By the dew. By the dew. So dew is considered to be a symbol of the blessing of God. Hence, the confirmation of the divine favor God will now show to Gideon and the Israelite forces. Verse 39. Lane.
And Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew.
Now, some people think that this second request would be considered a quote-unquote greater miracle. A quote-unquote greater miracle, if there is such a thing. Since some might surmise that it would be possible or natural for a fleece to attract moisture. But for the threshing floor to be wet and the fleece to be totally dry would really, so to speak, not me, but so to speak, be the hand of God. And directing the dew just to that area would be a sure sign that he fought for Israel. Verse number 40.
And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground.
So we should find no surprise that once again Jews demand signs, right? And Greeks look for wisdom. So as we close out the chapter, and we're going to continue next time, just to recap the stage, it's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, probably, since the Israelites have left Egypt. They're without any kind of religious or spiritual or political leader. It appears to be every clan, every tribe for themselves. There's no unification of the nation. The gains they received during the ministry in the time of Deborah and holding the valley of Jezreel have left their hand. They're being oppressed by other mice, by the Midianites and the Amalekites from the east. The cat, Egypt, is weak under Ramses IV and Ramses V. There's tremendous apostasy in the land. And so we have here the rise of the much needed religious and political leader. We have the rise of the Reformation of Yahwistic worship. And we have the rise of the unification of the tribes again to come together for a single cause and purpose. And we'll see what happens next session.
It's a cliffhanger.
It's a-
Yeah.